In the lexicon of crime, what Israel is currently doing is called plea bargaining. Israel is copping to a lesser charge with respect to the number of Palestinians dead and disappeared by its death squads in Gaza. By admitting to only 70,000 dead and disappeared in Gaza, Israel is haggling, pleading out, negotiating. The Israelis rely on the West's compliant pundits. They know how stupid they are, at least those who did time in mainstream media. An example is the celebration by some self-styled independent media of the fact that Israeli military now admits that 70,000 souls were murdered in Gaza. Nothing Israel does is uncalculated. The genocidal entity knows full well that the number of murdered and maimed Gazans is many times higher. So Israel cops to what is in reality the lesser charge. Every common criminal and serial offender knows the tactic. Moron media fail to comprehend that Israeli leadership is copping to a lesser charge with an intent to sustain Israel's international impunity. The dumb, non-dissident media are reflexively offering Israel a plea bargain in advance. You can't fix stupid, said one Texan funny man. I think it was Ron White. There is not a pill you can take or class you can go to. Stupid is forever. On top of that, since Israelis keep killing and destroying as the fancy takes them, the 70,000 plea bargain figure, now readily accepted by the perpetrators who are on the lam, is no longer valid. Even that undercount, reported by CNN as well, is outdated. Late in December of 2025, OSHA had counted 70,668. Haaretz, 71,000. In fact, as far back as June 26 of the same year, Neil Hasson, writer for Haaretz, announced that yes, in Gaza about 100,000 human beings were already killed. Later, in the Hebrew edition of July 18, Haaretz featured an op-ed by a University of London expert in the assessment of the casualties of war, although genocide is not war. He admitted that yes, in Gaza, about 100,000 human beings had already been killed. After that, on November 25 of the same year, the Max Planck Institute for Demographic Research proclaimed that the current violent death toll in Gaza likely exceeded 100,000. While their underestimation is already invalid for obvious reasons, at least these great scientific minds understand that the situation in Gaza is, well, fluid. With a lot of pomp, Max Planck said that the death toll in Gaza, which this lot attributes to mysterious forces of armed conflict and political instability, will keep rising and life expectancy will continue to sharply decline. It's hard to know how to respond. I roll my eyes. Next, they'll be instructing us to just wait for the legitimate PS moron media in their infinite wisdom to remind us that the evidence in Gaza must first be carefully bagged and tagged and fingerprints lifted from each and every corpse before the serial killer state, Israel, can be named and implicated in the homicide of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians. More seriously, one might inform the misguided simpleton media and the Max Plancks that their belated undercounts were preceded by our others like them months ago. I mentioned Haaretz, but before Haaretz came the Lancet. 10 months into the genocide in July of 2024, The Lancet, a British medical journal, put the direct and indirect casualties of Israel's industrial-scale mass murder in Gaza at around 186,000. Look around you at Gaza's landscape and the surviving goats who are now confined to the western half of the tiny enclave because the demonic Israel Defense Forces have bisected the strip, occupied the east, and are by stealth encroaching and stealing on the western Gaza. In 2024, Air Wars, an independent non-profit that collects data on violent conflict worldwide, suggested that by almost any metric, every metric, the harm to civilians from the first month of the Israeli campaign in Gaza is incomparable with any 21st century air campaign. It is by far the most intense, destructive, and fatal conflict for civilians that air wars had ever documented. One expert claimed Israel's war on Gaza may have been the fastest case of killing 1% of the population in the 21st century. And the death of 2% of the population at that stage placed the Gaza conflict among the 5 most lethal conflicts in the 21st century. Make that 12% of the population. The Air Wars report is from 2024. On the ground, always beyond reproach, the Euromed Monitor observers reported in November of 2025 that 12% of Gaza's Palestinians had been murdered, disappeared, or detained. From the evidence I had collected as early as November of 2023, I felt it not unwise to deduce that 12 months on, we'd be speaking of the following distinct possibility. By the time the Israeli serial killers stop the carnage, there could be at least 250,000, maybe more, direct and indirect Palestinian deaths brought about by Israel. I surmised that in November of 2023, because this thing speaks for itself, but my own simple calculations helped. Early in December of 2023, in the face of Israel killing and lying about everything in sight, I did a proportional, if limited mathematical comparison to just how vampiric the vaunted Israel Defense Forces are. Force-fed, like everybody, the fiction of the IDF as the most moral army in the world, I decided to compare like with like in limited but significant theaters of war. By my December 2023 modest math compared Israel's offensive in Gaza against Hamas late in 2023 to America's onslaught in Fallujah against the Iraqi resistance in 2004. On the numbers, I had been exceedingly charitable to the Israelis, given that their victims, then as now, buried beneath the rubble and were still mostly unaccounted for, as well as considering that the IDF resumed hostilities against civilians on December 1 after the briefest of pauses. My essay called Gaza versus Fallujah, Barbaric Blitzkrieg highlights U.S. Marines' superiority. It showed the following. Had Fallujah been as populated as Gaza, 2.4 million, which is the number Google spat out then, the United States Marines would have killed approximately 4,200 Iraqis by December of 2023. This is a far cry from the IDF's butcher's bill of 15,000 civilians in Gaza by 2023. If Gaza were as small as Fallujah, 400,000, the Israelis, befitting their butcher's bill until December of 2023, would still have killed at least 2,500 souls compared to the 700 our Marines killed. Besides, the rational mind doesn't really need the plonks at Max Planck and their modeling methodology to tell him or her what is before our very eyes, to tell us what deductions that stick to reality have produced over 2 years. Consider the destruction of infrastructure alone, and the humanitarian and service sector martyrs who man it. It comes courtesy of the Institute for Palestine Studies, and I'm going to read this to you. Percentage of civilian infrastructure destroyed, more than 90%. Initial direct losses in all sectors, more than 70 billion US dollars. Amount of rubble in the Gaza Strip, more than 61 million tons. Number of explosives dropped on Gaza, more than 200,000 tons. Number of unexploded ordnance, in excess of 20,000. Area of the Gaza Strip seized by occupation through invasion or fire, more than 80%. Number of hospitals destroyed and disabled, 38. Number of destroyed universities and educational institutions, 165. Number of destroyed schools, 670. Number of mosques completely destroyed, 135. Number of days border crossings were closed, more than 600. Number of aid trucks denied entry by the occupation, more than 120,000. Number of food kitchens and aid distribution centers targeted, 108. Number of martyrs from medical personnel, 1,670. Number of martyrs from civil defense crews, 140. Number of martyred municipal employees, including 4 mayors, 176. Number of martyred police and security personnel, 787. Number of martyred UNRWA employees, 203. Number of martyred journalists, 254. It's closer to 300. Number of martyred scientists, academics, and teachers, 1,023. Number of athletes, 894. This account is no longer current. After all, Israeli pleasures and pastimes are killing Palestinians. Nobody can keep up with the IDF's relentless bloodletting, and many, like our American ambassadors and envoys in the region, have covered it up. What's left of Gaza, the land and the living ghosts that roam it, continues to die out, peter out. 18 months since the Lancet's 2024 estimate, given the scale of destruction of everything in sight, given that death, starvation, and injury don't end with genocide nominally reduced, it's not unreasonable to peg the loss of Palestinian life via direct and indirect Israeli violence at 250,000 souls at least. But, surprise, surprise, February 2025 finds the Lancet asleep to its own findings. You recall that in July of 2024, with some certainty, the Lancet said that Israel had directly and indirectly murdered around 186,000 Palestinian souls. Well, by February of 2025, the Lancet had begun to deploy Israel's plea bargain undercount instead of their own initial figures. On February of 2025, presumably as follow-up to its June 2024 report, the Lancet provided not so much of an update as some weasel words instead. The Bafflegab the journal has now adopted entails indirectly agreeing with what we already know, that the Palestinian Ministry of Health had achieved good accuracy in mortality documentation with some underreporting. However, the level of underreporting the journal puts at a mere 41%, less than their original 2024 estimate of 186 souls lost to date. A far more credible source than Max Planck or the Lancet seems to be Mads Gilbert, a dedicated Norwegian physician who had worked in Gaza for decades until banned by the predator state, and who now attests that before October 7, the average life expectancy in Gaza was 74 years. Today, an infant born in Gaza can expect to live for 35 years. Should he survive the Israel-American interregnum genocide now simmering? You know, the lull between the full-blown genocide and the end of genocide. Late in June of 2025, there was word of a Harvard-published report according to which 377,000 had gone missing or were dead in Gaza. I have been unable to access the data extracted from it other than via a secondary source. The source appears to recite data points that he had assembled from a report by an Israeli academic. Links are in my full essay posted below for you. In Gaza Disappeared, dated June 25 of last year, our secondary source, Dr. Dan Shawless, explains that prior to the siege, spanning from 2023 to 2025, Gaza's population was approximately 2.227 million. Israeli Defense Forces estimate that the three main populated enclaves now contain 1.85 million people. Breakdown as follows: 1 million in Gaza City, 500,000 in Mawasi on the coast, 0.35 million in central Gaza. That leaves, to quote, 377 Gazans whose whereabouts are unknown. A demographic horror story is also a legal and moral reckoning. Let that sink in, my friends. Yes, it's unconfirmed, but I here repeat the 377,000 missing number because of the utter plausibility of it, because of the extent of the cover-up and the territorial strangulation to which Palestinians are still being subjected. Ultimately, it will come down to how many Gazans remain. Counting the remains. As you can see, the plea is peanuts compared to what should be the original indictment. As with so many of Israel's quicksilver narratives, admitting that 70,000 Palestinians perished in Gaza is part of a process of haggling, hammering out an agreement that satisfies both crooked prosecution and defense, with truth falling by the way. Plainly, Israel's aim is to subvert the truth. The plea bargain is ideal for that. The plea bargain happens to be the main method of adjudication in the United States. Since the plea bargain is nothing more than a negotiated deal It perverts the very goal of any justice system. Not that you'd know it because it's so unbelievable these days, but the justice system's mandate is to unveil the truth. As you know from crime dramas, the common criminal who accepts a plea confesses to a lesser charge in exchange for a lighter sentence or no sentence. This means no trial, no guilt phase, and no penalty phase.